Hey Reader Pops, welcome back to another video. My name is Tyler and today we are going to be talking about all the books I read in September. September was a month. I know everyone says like, oh, the year's flying by so fast, but September, I think in some parts I've just totally disassociated from the month because I can't even remember some of these books. So you're just gonna need to bear with me. I do have the tendency to just babble on about books, but today I'm gonna try and be more succinct. We'll see how well that goes. Let's go over some stats really quick before we start talking about the juicy details. For September, I read 11 books in total and I did have one DNF. For the genre breakdowns, I read 5 romances, 4 fantasy, 1 fiction, and 1 mystery. One major win of the month is, again, I completed my TBR. So 2 months in a row, I have read 8 out of the 8 books. My average rating this month took a bit of a nosedive. I averaged a 3.27, which is kind of brutal. For my total page count, I read 3,981 pages. And with all of that out of the way, we can now hop into the first book I read in September. Started off the month reading The Traitor Queen on my Kindle. This is the sequel to The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle Jensen. The Bridge Kingdom, I gave 3 stars. Same with The Traitor Queen. The reason I think these books didn't hit as much for me is they are just so politics heavy. We have like 6 different lands all battling for trade routes, alliances, for control of this bridge. It was kind of sold to me as a romantasy and I just wholeheartedly disagree. 90% of these books is politics, 10% romance. In book 1, we follow Laura and Aaron. They are from warring kingdoms. To fulfill this treaty between their 2 countries, Laura has to marry Aaron, and she's been trained since birth to be basically this badass assassin. And her plan between her and her father is to marry Aaron and infiltrate his country so that her father can take over. Of course, since there is a hint of romance, over the course of her being with Aaron and being exposed to his country, she realizes that maybe she didn't have a very accurate view of the country before she moved there. The ending of book 1 is pretty crazy. I mean, you can see it coming from a mile away, but how everything plays out is pretty crazy. And book 2 is just continuing on with those events, and our characters are in a very difficult position regarding their romance. Just so much of this book was spent with them in conflict, with the countries in conflict, and it just seemed like this impossible enemies to lovers trope to overcome. The Bridge Kingdom series does technically continue on from here, but it follows a different couple. They're kind of like duologies following separate couples. I don't plan on continuing on with this series. I felt like both The Bridge Kingdom and The Traitor Queen were a slog to get through. I don't think it's poorly written, so if you like politics-based books, you might like this one. It just simply wasn't my thing. Continuing on with things that just simply weren't my thing, I listened to The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams as an audiobook. The next 3 books I'm going to talk about were in a sports romance reading vlog that I did, but this was my 3rd book by Sarah Adams. I have read her When in Rome series, and I do like those a little bit more. Unfortunately, The Cheat Sheet just really didn't hit for me. This is a sports romance where we follow an NFL quarterback, Nathan, and his best friend, Bree, through a cute little friends to lovers story. It is dual POV, and we learn very early on that both of these 2 people are in love with each other. They've been in love with each other for years, but both of them are just too scared of risking their friendship, losing the friendship, to say anything. And I think I'm just learning about myself that friends to lovers maybe just isn't my trope, because it just feels too low stakes to me. Like, you guys are already so close, you know everything about each other. Typically what I found, you're just too scared to risk the friendship by wanting to take it to the next step. But overall, this book was just so low stakes. I didn't feel like the characters were interesting. There wasn't enough going on in the surrounding stories. Things just felt so unrealistic. I was bored and I just wanted it to be over. I had debated giving this a 2.5. I just couldn't find almost one redeeming quality within this book, and therefore I had to drop it down to 2 stars. The next sports romance, which actually took me hugely by surprise, was Mile High by Tomforde. I have heard so many people trash talk this book so heavily, specifically regarding our male main character Xander's. He comes off in the beginning very much as this player, womanizer, hockey player, and he gets introduced to our female main character Stevie because she is the flight attendant on the team's private jet. The flight attendants this season are with them throughout the whole year, so they see each other very frequently, and over the course of time, over the course of months, they develop feelings for one another. So again, coming back to how widely disliked this male main character is, I will say in the first 30% of this book he is largely unlikable. However, you kind of learn that this is more of a front and a persona that he puts on, and I felt like the author really did a lot of work to have him be a emotionally dense character. He goes to therapy, he has a difficult family history, he really struggles with this womanizer persona that's been put onto him and he feels like he has to uphold. And I felt like it was really well done. I really liked his character development. I love how he just worshipped her. There's a lot of discussion around her size. I'm not totally sure. I have heard a few people say this, but I believe there's plus size representation with her. So there's a lot of talk around her body, but he is so worshipping of her body. Helps her build a lot of confidence in herself. If you have a lot of negative self-talk around your body or your size, this book could be slightly triggering because there are a lot of discussions around it. I mean, I felt like it was realistic because as women, I think so many of us are so unjustly hard on ourselves and our body, but it might feel a little bit too realistic to some people, so just want to give that warning. As I am just hyping up this book and hyping up these characters, you might be thinking why I didn't give this 5 stars. The main drawback for me with this book is that it was just simply too long. It was coming up on 500 pages. I was heavily skimming the last 100 to 120 pages, but overall my introduction to the Windy Series City was a huge success, and the next book I read was continuing on with this, reading book 2, The Right Move. And I'm just completely opposite to I think most people regarding this series. I feel like people worship The Right Move, and specifically our male main character Ryan, but I ended up not liking The Right Move as much as I liked Mile High, which I feel like is just a very unpopular opinion. So as mentioned with our male main character Ryan, he is actually Stevie's brother. Additionally, one of Stevie's co-workers, Indy, ends up having a really tough breakup, needing a place to stay, and Stevie offers Ryan's apartment for Indy to crash in temporarily. So we have some forced proximity between Ryan and Indy as they're now roommates. Very much a grumpy sunshine because Ryan is extremely type A and Indy is much more of a free spirit. Because Ryan is so type A and he is viewed as a bit robotic by his team's manager, so they enter into this fake dating situation so Ryan can appear a bit more human and kind of gain favor with his team's manager or team owner. A couple of things that I didn't like about this book: both of them, Ryan and Indy, have very traumatic things that happen regarding previous relationships and create a ton of trust issues that they have. How quickly and out of nowhere these two get over their trust issues to get together felt a bit out of place for me. Regarding Indy's background, the storyline between her old friends and her ex, I hated all of them so severely. Indy was such a doormat, and I really hate that depiction of women in books. I feel like it's so overdone. It's uncreative in my opinion. I'd much rather see a strong woman that maybe is a little bit more prickly. Think of like Nesta, for instance. I actually love Nesta. While she has a lot of faults, at least she doesn't let people walk all over her. And I've just read too many doormat women at this point. It's boring to me. So because of that, I just didn't connect to Indy on just about any level at all. I don't know how to wrap it up other than I just couldn't connect to their romance, couldn't connect to Indy. Loved Ryan, but I've read so many other couples in books that I like more than them. So I landed on a 3.5. I think 3.5 is maybe a little bit generous. Maybe if I was being uber specific, it's a 3.25, but I'm definitely going to continue on with the series. One warning, they are pretty spicy. I will say Mile High was spicier than The Right Move, but I think overall the series is pretty heavy on the spice, so just know that that going into it. Next book was a really short read. It was crazy to me how fast I was able to get through this one. I read Scorch Roses by Carissa Broadbent. This is a novella that comes between The Serpent and the Wings of Night and The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. If you're going to read this novella, which I would encourage you to do, please read it after book 1. We get introduced to a character that is referenced pretty heavily in Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. If you didn't know about him through this novella, he would feel kind of random and out of place. The character we get introduced to is called Vale, and he is a vampire. Our female main character is named Lilith, and Lilith's entire life has just been surrounded by death. It's a miracle that she even made it into adulthood, considering how her childhood went. But now in adulthood, her town and her sister have been diseased with this plague that's just killing anything and everyone. Lilith is watching her sister slowly wither away, and in an effort to save her, she thinks that Vale can help. She ends up making a deal with Vale, and once a month she goes to visit him. She brings him a rose, and in exchange he gives her a vial of blood. And she uses this blood to experiment with and try to create a cure. I'm not gonna lie, in the first half of this book I was kind of confused where the plot was going, but again, I think it does lead well into book 2 in the series. I think it was a bit easier to read because it's more emotionally driven rather than plot driven, but I definitely think it is worth your time and would recommend. This actually isn't the order I read these books in, but I'm gonna go ahead and just hop to The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King since we're already talking about this series. In The Serpent and the Wings of Night, we follow Araya, who is a human girl that gets saved by the vampire king, raised and trained by him to enter into this tournament called the Kajari, and if you win the Kajari, you get a gift granted by the goddess of Nyaxia. Through the Kajari, she meets Rain. We follow them having to team up, create alliances within the tournament, and then the events right after the tournament. The ending of book 1 was intense to say the least, and going on into book 2, the craziness just continues. Book 1 was extremely action-packed. Book 2, it is a bit more of political scheming and betrayals. Who can you trust? Who's going to backstab you? Things of that nature. I think this book is well written. I do think it is severely too long. Our characters would take 1 step forward, 2 steps back. After a while, after 400 pages, it was just kind of frustrating to read about, and really I was just kind of looking forward for the book to be over with. And I don't even fully remember what happens at the end. Clearly it wasn't super impactful. So with the 2 books in the novella, they all followed characters within the House of Night, but there's like 4 houses within this world, and I think each house is getting 2 books and a novella. So we're going to have 12 books in total, in theory. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. Read this at your own risk. Just know you're getting involved with 1, books that are extremely long, and then 2, a series that is basically never ending. Next book I'm going to talk about is Life's Too Short by Abby Jimenez. I'm getting concerned, guys. I don't know if I like Abby Jimenez. The last 2 books I've read by her have been just absolute failures. My biggest issues within the story lie with our female main character. We follow Vanessa, who is actually a YouTube star. She's gotten famous for traveling the world and living life to the fullest because she has this hereditary terminal illness. And that's kind of what helped her channel take off. She is forced to return home because her little sister just had a baby. However, her little sister is a drug addict and unable to care for and provide a safe environment. So Vanessa takes over, receives temporary guardianship, and she is struggling. She was not prepared to be a mom, and during one really tough night, her neighbor Adrian wanders over and turns out to be like the baby whisperer. So they start hanging out, and while the relationship is building, we're getting more background on Vanessa and what appears to be her worsening illness. I feel like I have a whole list of things that I don't like about this book, but let's start off with the fact that Vanessa's character is pretty much 85% shaped around this illness. How the illness is handled at the end of the book, and Abby Jimenez's lack of ability to have a unique take on what love can look like with those who have an illness. Shocking to me. So overly disappointed in how the ending of this book was handled. The romance, it happened in 2.2 seconds. insane how quickly they fell in love, and in my opinion just thoroughly unbased. I don't know what these two loved about each other. 3, Vanessa's family dynamics, the discussions around Vanessa's enabling of not only her sister but her dad as well, blame being shifted to Vanessa for why her sister was a drug addict, like the other 2 stars, I just almost couldn't find a redeeming quality about this book. Maybe even 2 stars is a bit too generous. I don't know. I really hated this book. Unfortunately, I already own Just for the Summer, so I feel like I'm going to be roped into that one no matter what, but I think that might be my last book by her. The discussions around addiction, around the terminal illness, it just felt like such a cop-out, and I was left very angry by the end of this book. So moving on. Let's talk about our first physical book, which is The Blonde Identity by Ali Carter. The next 4 books I talk about were all in a 24-hour readathon. Make sure to check that out. That was my first 24-hour readathon. We had some moments where I was scared, but overall I think it was a positive experience, and I think I'll be doing it again. But the book I started with, and I'm so glad I started with this because it was so easy to read. Within this book we follow, basically think of her as Jane Doe. We don't fully know who she is or her backstory until kind of the second half of the book, but she wakes up on a snowy day in Paris with no idea who she is, what she's doing, or why she's there. But she gets woken up by Sawyer telling her to run because just about every spy agency ever is coming after her to kill her. We follow these two trying to evade all of these different bad guys while also trying to figure out the mystery of who she is. This is just a fun, fast-paced, silly, goofy time. I've talked about this quite a few times, but I have a history reading Ali Carter's books. She has a YA series called The Gallagher Girls, which is basically like this spy all-girls academy. I absolutely loved it growing up. This is basically the adult version of this because we're following 2 spies. There's some romance that goes on with this, some mystery. It's categorized as a fiction because it's not fully one way or the other, but this was just absolutely a joy to read. Next book within the readathon was People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. At this point, I have read almost all Emily Henry novels. The only one I have left at this point was her most recent book, Funny Story. I had saved People We Meet on Vacation end of her books because I've heard that this isn't everyone's favorite. This is another friends to lovers book, which we now know that trope isn't totally my favorite, but we follow Poppy and Alex over the course of like 12 years. They meet each other while in college, and as they become closer, they start going on yearly summer trips together. And travel becomes a huge part of Poppy's life. She has a travel blog. She also works at a travel magazine. They go to all of these amazing, beautiful places. And we find out that 2 years ago, something happens while on their vacation, and then they don't talk to each other for years. Poppy starts feeling very lost, and her friend asks her, when was the last time you were happy? And she realizes it was the last time her and Alex were together. So she ends up reaching out and invites him on a trip as kind of like this last chance to rebuild their friendship and potentially fall in love. We do kind of have 2 timelines going on, where we have present day on their current trip together, and then we're also working from 12 years ago, moving towards the big event that happens. I did very much enjoy this book. I do simply love Emily Henry's writing. I will say this wasn't my favorite book of hers. It's actually second lowest out of her books I've read, but keep in mind it's still a 4.5 stars, so it's not that bad by any means. I think a lot of it lies on that Friends to Lovers isn't my favorite, especially such a long-term Friends to Lovers. I think so much of that trope relies on miscommunication or lack of communication, and again, it isn't enough high stakes for me to understand and get behind why the lack of communication is occurring. Still, absolutely loved it. I will read Emily Henry's grocery list. I just don't think this is my favorite by her. Next book. Again, we're still within the 24-hour readathon thing, so I want you to take my review with this somewhat with a grain of salt. I read Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This book was a 5-star prediction for me. I have only ever heard amazing things about this story. We follow 2 rivaling writers who work at the same newspaper, and they are battling each other for the same columnist position. The silhouette and backdrop of this story is there's a war going on between 2 gods, and our female main character Iris is kind of going through a tough time right now because her brother has left to go to war and her mom is an alcoholic. So Iris is the sole provider for the family. If she wants to eat, she has to be the one bringing in the money. So this job is very important for her. Our male main character, Roman, comes from a very different background. He comes from a very affluent family. Writing is more of a passion for him rather than a need. And these 2 start building a relationship beyond the work rivals that they are currently, because Iris has this magical typewriter. She starts by writing these letters to her brother. She puts them underneath her wardrobe, and one day she finds that the letter's gone. Instead of the letters going to her brother, they actually go to Roman, and he's able to identify who this is pretty quickly just by some things that she includes in the letters. And he writes back to her saying, this isn't who you think it is. He does not share his identity. So Iris starts building feelings and a relationship with this anonymous person, but Roman knows who he's talking to. Towards the second half of the book, the plot drastically changes. Instead of a focus of them at the same workplace, that very much shifts, and their letters to each other get much more emotional. But I still just wasn't fully connected to the romance. And a huge problem for me was I just really didn't care about the war or the politics that were going on. This is only a duology, and book 2 is called Ruthless Vows. And apparently Ruthless Vows very much just focuses on the politics, and the romance takes a severe backseat to the story. So I don't fully know what I want to do with this duology, if I want to continue it or not. I mentioned taking my review with a grain of salt because I read this in the thick of the 24-hour readathon. So potentially my lack of connection to the characters and the plot was just simply because of when I read the book. So I landed on a 3.5 with this one because just something about this didn't fully hit for me, but I do think a lot of people would like this book. Moving along to potentially the book where I had the least amount of enjoyment while reading this. The Naturals by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. I learned about myself that maybe mystery/thrillers are just not my thing, because this is a YA mystery where we follow this 17-year-old girl named Cassie, and she gets invited to this FBI program called the Naturals program, where it has a group of teenagers all with natural uncanny abilities, puts them together and trains them to help the FBI solve cold cases. Cassie's interested in this program because her mom went missing and is assumed to be dead 5 years ago after a brutal attack. Cassie still doesn't have answers. She kind of sees this as an opportunity to learn more. Cassie's a natural profiler, and not only do we get Cassie's perspective, but we also get another perspective. We get the perspective of a serial killer. Whenever we're in the serial killer's chapters, the perspective is you. So you did this, you enjoyed seeing them scream, you enjoyed hurting them, blah blah blah. Hated it, hated it, hated it. You might be wondering why I gave it a 2.5 instead of like a 1, because my enjoyment level of this book is a 1, but I gave it a 2.5 if I was thinking of this on a 5-star scale. I gave it just right in the middle because I think I'm just too biased to actually give a full review on this. This is just simply not my book. This isn't my genre. This isn't my thing. I stay away from any shows or movies that involve serial killers. I am not a true crime person. It is just simply not my thing, so I don't think I can give a real rating on this with that being the case. If you are any of those things or like Criminal Minds or anything like that, this could be a fun introduction to it because it is seen as, you know, the YA Criminal Minds. It is a 4-part series. Unfortunately, I already own the entire box set. Potentially, I might give book 2 a shot in a month or two. Like, I am in no rush to read that because this did read extremely quickly. I just need a solid 1 to 2 months of decompression time because I hated everything to do with the serial killer aspect. It left me feeling so gross and unsettled, and I just really don't like that feeling. The final book of this month was actually my DNF. I attempted to read In Your Dreams, Holden Rhodes by Stephanie Archer. Now, Miss Archer loves a spicy little rom-com. I think her more famous or well-known series is the Vancouver Storm series, which is a hockey romance series that starts with Behind the Net and then goes into The Fake Out. I absolutely love The Fake Out. It was a 5-star book for me, surprisingly. And so I wanted more Stephanie Archer content. I then discovered her Queen's Cove series, which follows a series of 4 brothers. And this book is book 3, where we follow the brother Holden. He seems to be the grumpiest of all the brothers. He owns a construction company, and apparently him and our female main character, Sadie, have some bad history. They didn't really get along in high school, and he didn't leave the best impression on her. Sadie comes back into town because her aunt actually just passed away. Her aunt owned an inn, and her aunt didn't have any children, so it was unknown who she'd leave the inn to, and she ends up leaving it 50-50 between Sadie and Holden. Sadie doesn't live in this town. She's also in a lot of debt, so she wants to sell the inn. Holden would prefer not to sell the inn, so they come to an agreement where they'll both work together to kind of renovate and remodel, and Holden will most likely buy out Sadie's portion of the inn whenever the renovations are complete. Another thing going on is that until the renovations are done, Sadie's going to be Holden's dating coach because Holden has seen his 2 brothers before him fall in love, get married, and he wants the same for himself. But because he's such a grumpy character, he's not really the best at dating. So these 2 kind of start entering into a fake dating situation in an effort to find Holden a wife. I'm making these faces because the plotline just felt so underdeveloped and so random and weird. The characters also felt so underdeveloped and lacked complexity. I really feel like these 2 only existed to have sex. I don't feel like she took enough time to develop their romance. Literally, for instance, one moment they were eating Thai food, and then the next moment they were dry humping each other. And it was just so bizarre to me. Like, it wasn't sexy, it wasn't cute, it was just weird. I ended up DNFing this at 46% because we had already had a couple spicy moments and none of it felt justified. Coming from someone who enjoys a spicy romance, this just so severely lacked any plot and any emotional depth that I couldn't even get halfway through it. I'll definitely continue to give Stephanie Archer a chance because book 3 in the Vancouver Storm series just came out, The Wingman. I want to give it a go. I do think that is her much stronger series. This one was just a complete flop for me. I know for a fact that Stephanie Archer can do better than this. So that is the end of my September wrap up. I feel like my wrap ups aren't usually this negative. I feel like September was kind of a rough month, so I'm hoping for better things in October. October is my birth month, so any Libra babies out there, I'm sending you a big hug. But just want to say thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate you being here. Make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss our upcoming videos. Coming up next week will be a reading vlog, so stay tuned for that. But this is where I will love you and leave you. Hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.